President Trump is eager to open up more businesses as soon as possible, even as the death toll from the coronavirus keeps rising. But it appears that President is pushing to reopen the U.S., but that won't apply to the nation's borders. Last night on Twitter, Mr. Trump said that he'd issue an executive order suspending all immigration to the U.S. He claims doing so will protect American jobs and lives from the, quote, invisible enemy. Skylar Henry has more on the president's latest maneuvers during the pandemic.
Democratic leaders say they reached a compromise with the White House on a nearly $500 billion stimulus package.
Staff was up all night writing. There are still a few more I's to dot and T's to cross, but we have a deal, and I believe we'll pass it today.
The bill will likely include $310 billion in additional funds for the Paycheck Protection Program. $125 billion of that will be reserved for rural and minority-led businesses. It also provides $75 billion for hospitals and $25 billion for COVID-19 testing. Minority Leader Chuck Schumer says the final sticking point was the money for testing.
You need a significant federal involvement. You need a national strategy, and the president and Mnuchin and Meadows agreed to that, to their credit, and that will be in the proposal.
The FDA announced it's authorizing a new test that will allow people to do a swab at home and mail it to the lab.
The White House says there are enough tests available right now for governors to start phase 1 of reopening their economies,
if they meet the other criteria of 14 days of reduced cases and sufficient hospital capacity to prepare for any eventuality that may occur.
The president also announced via Twitter last night that in order to protect American jobs, he's suspending immigration to the U.S.
He's going to look at how he can protect Americans both economically and protect their health. And so this is a temporary issue, just like the prior bans were temporary, and we're doing it to keep the American people safe.
Immigration and travel have already been restricted to control the coronavirus. Skylar Henry, CBS News, the White House.
White House correspondent Weijia Jiang joins me now for more. Weijia, really at the offset of this pandemic, President Trump had made some efforts to restrict immigration, but this latest move, could it face legal challenges?
Well, sure, absolutely. And that's why sources tell us that this is not going to be a blanket ban. There's going to be exceptions carved in because the White House really wants to avoid national injunctions in the court system like we saw in the beginning of the president's term when he tried to implement other travel bans. The problem, Rena, is we don't have any details about what is going to be in the text of this executive order. So we don't know what groups of people it will specifically impact. And so, will that impact foreign nationals here who are in the process of becoming U.S. citizens? Will that impact green card holders? Will that impact, people who are coming here for seasonal work? These are all questions that we've been pressing the White House about and receiving no answers so far. But I can tell you that the Trump campaign sent out a letter to supporters to say that, this EO is coming, which really fuels what Democrats are arguing, which is it's a political move, that the president knows that immigration is at the center of his campaign, and this is just another excuse to highlight that. The president, though, insists that this is going to protect American jobs and protect people from the virus.
I want to talk to you also about getting money into the pockets of Americans. We know that Congress and the White House are working to help hammer out a deal to fund the Paycheck Protection Program, which ran out of money. Right. What's the latest on those negotiations? And Weijia, what do you expect to be in that deal? Do we have a sense?
So some good news for those businesses who are still waiting to get some help. We do expect that a deal will be approved, and the president could even announce an agreement during his briefing today, scheduled for 5 o'clock, because we know that congressional leaders are getting together right before that. And so this is a second round of funding for the PPP, that program that really is meant to help smaller businesses, keep their funds going. And the problem is because you're right, it did run out very quickly, $350 billion. So this new round is expected to include $310 billion for businesses, as well as some funding for hospitals and testing, which was a real sticking point for Democrats. They didn't just want to rush emergency money through, which is what Republicans wanted. They wanted to dedicate funds for a national testing strategy, which is so far lacking because, as you know, the president insists that it should be up to the states without, a federal plan in place because he wants governors to take that responsibility. And so, again, at the heart of this, though, is the money for those small businesses, and many of them did not make the cut during that first round. And so it is some good news for them as they try to get some money to stay alive.
Speaking of governors, Weijia, a fascinating story about the governor of Maryland, Larry Hogan, and his wife essentially reaching out to South Korea, able to secure 500,000 tests. We've heard from South Dakota's governor, who says she doesn't have the necessary supplies she needs right now. What is the White House doing? How are they addressing these concerns from the various governors?
So President Trump is speaking at length almost every day about the testing capacity in the U.S., and he says that states have the ability to do the tests, and so everything's good. The problem is it's not just the capacity that matters, it's actually implementing the tests. And these states say, sure, they could double and triple the amount they're doing, but they need the resources to do it. And so far, they don't have enough swabs. They don't have enough reagents, which is a critical chemical for the process. They don't have enough test tubes, and that's why they continue to urge the White House to help them out, to get some order of this supply chain so they can actually conduct the tests. And the White House says they're doing everything they can to help get supplies to where they are needed, but the president has repeated many times that at the end of the day, the burden is on the governors to try to get these supplies. And that's what Larry Hogan of Maryland said. He said, look, the administration told us we had to do it ourselves. They weren't helping us, and that's why we had to go to South Korea. But we know that the president has at least used the Defense Production Act to compel one swabbing company to provide more test swabs. But so far, he's resisted using it for those other items that I mentioned, and that remains a question about why.
You know, a fascinating story also about New York Governor Andrew Cuomo. I felt at the beginning he tried very hard not to isolate the president, but recently he hasn't been afraid to also be critical of the president. Obviously, New York, hardest hit by COVID-19. The two are scheduled to meet in the Oval Office this afternoon. Do you have a sense of what might be on the agenda? What does the White House expect, and what does Cuomo's team want to come out of that meeting?
Well, the governor tweeted ahead of his visit today, and he said that he really wants to talk about, surprise, testing, that there has to be a coordinated effort between the federal government and states, because that's the key to reopening the country in the way that the president wants. I will say Mr. Trump has said not everybody wants maximum testing. We don't know who he's talking about when he says not everybody, because when you talk to public health experts, they all say it is critical to be able to track the virus and to give people a peace of mind when they try to get back to normalcy. So certainly testing is going to be at the top of the agenda, at least for the governor. And, in recent days, the president has actually used Cuomo's words to show how he is doing. During a briefing recently, he had clips prepared showing Cuomo praising him and everything that the president has done to help the state, especially with regard to getting some other supplies like PPE and ventilators. And so you're right in that there's been a lot of praise, but a lot of criticism. So you don't really know what to expect out of this meeting. I mean, you have two New Yorkers who have fought publicly about the response. And I guess when you put them in a room, you don't really know what's going to happen until it happens. Yeah. But certainly it's going to be fascinating. I will say, Rena, that so far it's closed to the press, that meeting. But oftentimes what happens is last minute, the White House decides to open it back up so cameras can get inside. And if I had to bet money, I would say that's going to happen today because, this is two leaders who are leading the country, leading the hotspot in the country to fight this pandemic. And certainly I imagine that the president is going to want that to be captured.
And two leaders who are very active on Twitter, so I assume no matter what, we'll be hearing from them later this afternoon.
True.
Look forward to more of your reporting as well. Weijia, we'll check back with you as well. Thank you. Weijia Jiang from the White House.